Greetings and welcome to The Dividing Line. My name is James White, coming to you live from beautiful Evergreen, Colorado. We come to you live from up here each July. Well, not all of July, but it's a good time to be up here and not in Phoenix. I've seen a few 111s, 112s down there while I've been gone. Not really missing that, but up here. And it was because I was coming up here. I had been up here a couple of weeks ago. I flew up that time. And this time I drove up after spending some time in New York with Jeff and Luke, and we were doing some stuff on Mormonism while we were there. And this time I drove up, which is what I normally do, so that I can bring my own bike. There's nothing like having your own bike. I can assure you of that, especially on a 100-mile bike ride. Anyway, while I was driving up on Tuesday of this week, I stopped in, as I recall, I think that was in Grand Junction, Colorado. Maybe it was before then. I don't remember. In that particular area where you're in sort of the corner of Utah into Colorado is not the most remarkable area of travel. So it's hard to remember exactly where things are. Anyway, I stopped to get some gas, and I got a text message from Tom Buck, the troublemaker from Texas, now the doctoral troublemaker from Texas. And he basically said, well, I'm glad someone's still taking my phone calls. And I'm like, I'm literally standing there putting gas in the car, having just barely gotten my car up to the pump because some guy decided with this massive long trailer that he deserved all the pumps at that particular gas station at that time. And he was going to go in and buy some chips and have a hot dog or something and leave all the rest of us sitting out there. Anyways, it's just rude. Anyhow, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And he says, you don't know what's going on? And I'm like, no, I'm driving to Colorado. And I don't think it's overly wise to be driving on interstates while Twittering or Facebooking or anything else. And so he starts filling me in on the fact that the trailer for By What Standard had come out and the world had exploded. And so I stopped long enough to get a bite there. They had an A&W at the gas station. Warning, at the A&W at the gas station in Grand Junction, don't do it. I got some chicken fingers that I'm pretty certain if I had thrown them down like that, they would have bounced about 7 feet in the air. Rubbery. Oh, I think it was a rubber chicken they got instead of the real thing. Anyway, it was bad. So I was there long enough though, waiting for the rubbery chicken fingers to cook, to start looking at some stuff, seeing a few things on my phone, while not moving, obviously. And then I got a hold of Rich and said, hey, could you look at this? I had heard, Tom told me this, and this. Could you look this up and send me something about this? So I started catching up. But to be honest with you, the initial explosion had all taken place while I was blissfully, or not so blissfully, moving along various interstate highways, getting to. It was almost 14-hour trip. That's a long time. I'm sort of glad that happened because I wasn't a part. Now, full disclosure, I had been sent a link to the trailer with a password, and I could have watched it. The problem was it was sent. I think it may have been the day that I flew back from New York. 6 hours worth of delays, got home much later than I expected to, preach on Sunday, had to pack on Monday, leave on Tuesday. We did the Radio Free Geneva on Monday. I did not have time to look at it. I had not seen the trailer until I heard all the rest of the stuff about it. That's an advantage and a disadvantage. So I was up here in Colorado before I finally was able to fire it up and watch it. But I already knew what some of the conflicts were, what some of the accusations were even before then. Even at that, I had to roll it back to find the big point of conflict, a 1 second blur shot. And then right around that same time, or just before that, the statements started coming out, coordinated statements from the heads of Southern Baptist institutions, basically saying we shouldn't do this. 11th commandment to the wall. The 11th commandment has never been written anywhere, but it has been engraved in the soul of the Southern Baptist Convention. That's the best way to put it. And if you're not sure what the 11th commandment is, the 11th commandment is that Southern Baptists are not allowed to criticize fellow Southern Baptists in public. And the 11th commandment has a gradation. It's sort of like a graded curve, for the guy in the pew, but the higher up you get, and as soon as you work for a Southern Baptist entity of any kind, as many people found out a year and a half ago, year and a quarter ago, when they dared say something about what was being said at the MLK 50 stuff or what followed after that, where your job was being threatened for what you put on Twitter or Facebook. The more authority you have or the higher your position, then the more the 11th commandment applies to you. And the idea is if we don't have public fights, we'll all stay unified. Think about that one for a while, because it speaks to what you think is the basis of unity. And the only kind of unity that could possibly continue to have any meaning in a culture that is going to be putting more and more and more pressure upon us as believers. The foundation of our unity will have to become more and more and more defined and central and definitional. And that's not what you get when you have a unity that is based out of let's just not talk about what we disagree on. And we're not talking here about arguments about eschatology or issues regarding church polity. We really, really are talking about the future of the Southern Baptist Convention. For example, today there is a brouhaha going on because someone outside of Christianity as a whole, not even a believer, but someone who is very much involved in the analysis of critical theory in Western culture, responded to the rather mundane, in my opinion, statement from Union Theological Seminary that social justice is the gospel. Well, you'd expect that from Union. Union has been there for decades. Union responded to the statement on social justice and the gospel by denying scriptural sufficiency, inerrancy. It's that they are the very essence of this. And the idea is not that Union is a Southern Baptist seminary, because obviously it is not and nowhere near it, but that this is the trajectory. This is the direction that critical theory and cultural Marxism and social justice and whatever terms you want to use to describe the complex of concepts that are being used in light of the degradation of education in the West over the past 50 years that has removed critical thought, logic, reason, and the subjugation of emotion to transcendental values, has removed that as the central aspect of what defines mature thought, let alone mature Christian thought. These complex of ideas are utilizing that fundamental cultural change at that very important level to create systemic change across society. And now what we're seeing, as if a switch was flipped in March of 2018, the memo went out, go, we're ready, go. Part of this has to do, I honestly believe, If you'll take the time, again, this is something that takes time. This is why the social media platforms are producing schism and division amongst people who used to walk together, is because we have bought into the need for immediacy at the cost of depth. Immediate responses that are shallow, and shallow responses always appeal to the emotions. We are human beings. We've been created in the image of God. He has given us minds. We are called to have the mind of Christ. As a result, we as believers especially are shocked to see within the church this kind of thing happening, and the speed with which we are asked to respond to things is breeding this incredible shallowness, a lack of depth, a lack of connecting the dots, and instead an elevation of emotionalism, of emoting, rather than devoting serious time to reflection, to consider the history of ideas, the relationship to one another, what is the long-term effect of these things. All of that stuff has been pretty much put to the side, because in our society, those transcendental truths that we once believed as image bearers of God, we were to embrace, to value, and then in a disciplined fashion to apply in our thought, always keeping our emotions bridled and disciplined and under control. That's no longer what we see going on in the culture, amongst the cultural elites, in politics, and now, as of last year, and it's been in liberalism for a very, very long time within what calls itself the Christian church. But now, all of a sudden, we see it in our own ranks, and we are left wondering what in the world is going on, what in the world happened. That's background. A couple things about the trailer. I have nothing to do with it. Like I said, did not even see it until after the explosion took place. I would like to start with a word of criticism. And I do so having thought about these things for a few days, and trying to put aside the emotionalism of the outrage that has been generated, I think purposefully. That doesn't turn you into conspiratorialist. There is cooperation amongst people, even who have different motivations. There can be cooperation to try to accomplish things. I mean, just look at the current political situation. The one thing that I did not understand when I first saw it, but you see, when I don't understand something, it doesn't automatically mean that I'm going to question the motives or impugn the reasons for why people did what they did. That type of emotional response, we have to reject it. But I did not understand. I fully understand why, for example, the interviews that were done at the Southern Baptist Convention focused upon the critical resurgence. Because, and by the way, for the few people who don't know this, I'm not a Southern Baptist. I was ordained in the Southern Baptist Church. I've taught in Southern Baptist institutions. But I am not associated with the Southern Baptist Convention in that way. I have many, many friends who are, and I think that those of us who are Reformed Baptists, those of us who are conservative Presbyterians, should be very concerned about what's going on in the SBC as a whole, because we're in this together, whether we like it or not. We're in this together. The conservative resurgence is being undone by this movement. That's obvious. The redefinition of inerrancy, the redefinition of scriptural sufficiency, the redefinition of gender roles. It is one social justice train blowing through the front door, and the brakes have not been applied. And so it has everything to do with the conservative resurgence. It has everything to do with what happened in the past and why that's being undone now. So the discussions concerning scriptural sufficiency, identity politics, critical theory, and especially Resolution 9 at the convention, what took place at that time, the issues surrounding that, the identification of critical theory as merely a analytical tool, and the things associated with that makes perfect sense. If you're going to address those things, you've got to. That's what you've got to talk about. No choice about it. But what I did not understand was the Matt Chandler context. When I saw the brief clip of Chandler saying something about "we're not experts," I knew what that was from. I had not watched all of that, but I knew it was about the sexual abuse stuff. And I'm guessing, I didn't want to actually contact the Founders guys and ask questions about the production of the material, so I wouldn't be unduly influenced by that. But my understanding is, I could be wrong, but what I thought was the video of the brief video of Beth Moore, I think, was from the same thing at the SBC about sexual abuse. I'm not sure if that's what the Matt Chandler one was from. I think it might have been. I don't know. But I knew the context was the same of those two. And by the way, I think that's where the Rachel Denhollander blurred image came from too. I think it's from the same thing. And I don't know what that has to do with the film other than this theory. And here's where so much of the response has just been your standard outrage, impugning of motives. These people they're just the worst people on the planet. And so we're going to just assume the worst motives for anything. The idea of, in fact, if you even said, well, let's give the benefit of the doubt and see the movie, you need to repent, you sinner. And I have tweets of that. I have one up right now. I wrote on Twitter on July 24th. So here is my novel idea. How about we wait till the film comes out, listen to it carefully, take notes, and discuss the topics with open Bibles and a commitment to use the same standards we use for the central doctrines of the faith in discussing these controversial issues. Could that be any more vanilla, and could that be any more non-disputable? I mean, what I'm calling for is patience. Let's not make a decision based upon a 3-minute trailer. Secondly, careful hearing of its arguments, because you don't make arguments in a 3-minute trailer. That needs a little bit more time to do that. That would be the listening carefully, taking notes. Discuss the topics with open Bibles. Let's actually do what we say we believe, that we believe, and believe in scriptural sufficiency, and go to the Word with a commitment to use the same standards we use for the central doctrines of faith. In other words, let's not allow critical theory. Let's not allow whatever the popular thing is right now to determine our exegesis. But let's use the same hermeneutical principles that we use to defend the deity of Christ, the resurrection, atonement, and everything else, to analyze what the film says. That shouldn't be controversial. But a fellow by the name of Jason Harris, to Jason Harris on Twitter, responded to that tweet with these words: "This is the sort of abject moral ineptitude that has made it increasingly difficult to endorse you. I urge you, brother, with deep sadness, to serious soul searching and repentance." Okay? So, my novel idea of patiently waiting for the video to come out, listen to it carefully, honestly, and discuss it on the basis of having an open Bible and sound hermeneutical principles is, according to Jason Harris, who identifies himself as a theologian, abject moral ineptitude that should require, on my part, serious soul searching and repentance. This is when I've been talking about outrage. This is what I'm talking about. Another guy just a few moments ago that I've seen before, Joel Faust. This was literally 8:57. This was half an hour ago. The trailer is the problem. I don't care if the follow-up movie is the Jesus movie remastered. The trailer itself is an objectionable production worthy of rebuke. So there you go. We don't have to worry about the movie. Don't have to worry about what its arguments are. We can respond simply based upon this. This is what I mean when I'm talking about just abject outrage that is has filled social media. Now, back to my criticism. I don't know what the sexual abuse scandal has to do with the substance of the film, but here's my guess. And this is how you do it when you actually are willing to go, and I know Tom Askell. We don't call each other up on the phone and chat about the Tour de France, though that stage today. Oh man, that's terrible. If that ends up determining who won that. Anyway, sadness. And if you don't know about, don't worry about it. Only my fellow cycling fans understand what happened today. But we don't do that. Tom and I, we know each other. We've spoken at numerous conferences together. We get along real well. But he's there in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm not there any longer. And so, but I know he's just extremely careful. He does not want to. He has been forced by conviction to deal with this issue. I can just tell he would rather not be dealing with it at all. But he's been forced to recognize that what gave them the opportunity to make the historical argument that the founders of the Southern Baptist Convention included a large number of committed Reformed men, that conservative resurgence that was necessary for that, because liberals could care less what the founders actually believed. That's the whole point. That conservative resurgence is doomed if the current social justice invasion being led by Russell Moore and by others in high positions, have taken very high positions in the convention, is allowed to go unchecked. So here's my guess. My guess is that the connection that, if it's even a part of the film, will be drawn, is that one of the primary criticisms of the panel at the Southern Baptist Convention that was supposed to be talking about the issue of sexual abuse, many people on that panel hijacked the topic to attempt to promote egalitarianism and a fundamental reorientation of gender roles in the thought of the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention, and therefore down the line in the congregations themselves. That's my guess. And I don't know if that's the best way to have approached it, but my guess is that that's where it came from. Open to being corrected. If the film comes out and there's a whole bunch of stuff on that, I don't see that. I have no reason to believe that, but that would disprove my theory. But if the film comes out and that's the connection is made, is that there is this egalitarian movement and it is impacting gender roles. And hey, what we've talked about regarding Beth Moore, the removal of that whole section, homosexuality, from the book without notation, without even noting it until it was discovered. And then, hey, what's going on here? Oh, well, we just felt this, that, or the other thing. That's not how to do it. And so maybe that's where it was coming from. That's my guess. Anyway, must understand that there's two sources here of the outrage. And what's interesting is you have two very, very different forces here coming together in an unusual collaboration. The first is, as mentioned before, the 11th commandment of the Southern Baptist Convention, thou shalt not speak ill of a fellow Southern Baptist, which may have helped in the past during the period of the conservative resurgence, but now it has been co-opted by the very forces that would turn the trajectory of Southern Baptist seminaries into future Union theological seminaries. It must be understood that the continued obedience to the 11th commandment will result in the fundamental degradation and denial of the ninth. And when you have individuals who are willing to, quite simply, in a fundamentally political fashion, utilize funding from sources that most Southern Baptists would be shocked are actually having influence upon the Southern Baptist Convention and upon Reformed seminaries in general, and utilizing political terminology and mechanisms, are purposefully seeking to alter the course of the convention and its application of biblical principles to the current social system and the current social situation. That, I think, is really, really where the 11th commandment is allowing them to do this almost unchecked. And so when Founders comes out and says, we are going to address, and have you noticed that as long as somebody appeared in the trailer, the assumption is that person is being identified as a heretic or a non-brother or whatever else it might be. And one of the things that I know I've been criticized for, and I know Tom Askell's been criticized for, is attempting to deal with this issue as if we are dealing with brothers, to take seriously the profession and to try to keep this, even this debate and the sharp disagreement, within the bounds of fellowship. The assumption on the other side is, interestingly enough, they don't do that for us. I just read one. Hey, you need to repent. This is sin on your part. You're out there. Or let me just read you a tweet from Dr. James R. Riley. This was this morning, a couple hours ago, 2 hours ago. Dr. James R. Riley: evangelicals do not have to accept, understand, or respect the teaching / application of social justice. When they refuse, it highlights the fact that they have never had a true encounter with Jesus Christ. It's hard to understand oppression when you've always been the oppressor. So there you have someone plainly operating within the categories of critical theory, oppression, oppressor. That's what everybody is. Doesn't matter what you yourself have done. You're a part of a group. This is critical theory run amok. And what's it being used to say? Never been a Christian in the first place. And so we're hearing this more and more. It's the logical outcome of the application of critical theory. So that's what's being said. That's what's out there. We're not making this up, even though there are people who are saying that we're creating all of this, that none of it really exists. I'm not sure how they say this, how they get away with it, given the obvious nature of these things right in front of our eyes. But anyway, I've been criticized, Tom Askell's been criticized for attempting to pursue this issue amongst believers, and hence not utilizing the political mechanisms that people on the regressive left are well known for using. And what's causing a lot of us, certainly causes me a tremendous amount of pain, is to see inside what is called the fellowship of the external church, the very same methodologies and actions being undertaken that we see every single day in the political machinery around us, which is not much of a, if a machine is supposed to accomplish something, our machine's busted. And the same thing's happening within the church. The exact same methodology is being utilized over and over again. So I just don't think that this knee-jerk reaction that what Founders is saying is that everyone that they showed a picture of is a demon or a principality in power. I could not believe how many people, sane, rational people in other areas, were actually thinking that what you do is whatever's on the screen when the audio is taking place automatically means that there's this connection being made, and you're accusing this person of that, accusing that person of that. Especially with the blurred image thing, was like, really? Seriously? Because as I pointed out, one of the first things I pointed out is if you go like 3 minutes and 15 seconds into the trailer right before the end, there's a close-up of Tom Askell, not looking overly happy either. And the narrator is saying, "We've been played." Well, automatically, because everybody was saying every frame is chosen and it's all purposeful. You're supposed to be doing that's the other thing. And that means that the Founders were saying that Tom Askell has been playing us. It's just, it was really face-palmingly amazing, the stuff that was being said. If it were consistently applied, but of course it's not. You only apply it to what you want to apply it to, and that other thing was just random. That was just, but this is purposeful, whatever. The assumption that I'm going to make in looking at the trailer is I know these guys have good motives. They're fellow believers in Christ, and they believe in the sufficiency of Scripture, and therefore, I'm going to assume that the reason that the sexual abuse quotations were used was in relationship to the egalitarian movement. And that was explicitly put out there with the quotation from Dwight McKissick from the debate that he had with Tom Askell. So for me, was pretty obvious. There wasn't any reason for all of the beating of the chests and the burning of the Tom Askell figurines that were going on in Twitter. And obviously for me, since I'm the object of that kind of behavior and treatment all the time, then I want to be somewhat sensitive to not necessarily just jump on that bandwagon. And so all of that being said, the 11th commandment is the one source. So you have certain people embedded in the power structure of the SBC who have decided that the SBC needs to go this direction, the social justice movement. Again, we've discussed social justice over and over and over again. We've pointed out the vast difference between a biblically defined concept of justice and identity politics, racialism, gender confusion, egalitarianism, the whole gamut of tools that are being used to disassemble and take apart the past to create a new future. But it's not a new future based upon biblical categories or a biblical vision of mankind, the church, the gospel, and things like that. It's a very secularly defined perspective that most of us believe will be absolutely disastrous, and in fact, people like me believe is a part of God's judgment upon Western culture that has had so much light and has sinned against that light. But I said there were two sources for the outrage. The other is simply the social justice movement as a whole, and the idea that of what we're seeing all across. This is the same thing. The exact same motivation on the part of these people that motivates the students who run into classrooms or amphitheaters, stand outside when a conservative is attempting to speak in a university and bang on windows, beat on drums, scream like children. And we're seeing this all across Western culture. We've seen it for at least a decade now. And you know that if you attempt to say anything against the narrative, that you're going to encounter people like this. There is only one side that is allowed to speak. Only the oppressed get to speak. And if you're a part of the oppressor class, you can speak as long as you do so as a dhimmi. Let's cross categories here, because that's what's being asked of people that would not be considered in one of the oppressed groups. Intersectionality again. If you have a low intersectionality score, then you have to act as a dhimmi. You have to act as a person subjugated. I agree, and I am bad, and my ancestors were bad, and Western culture has always been bad, and the morals and ethics we used to have about marriage is such bad, and so I will confess to all these things, and I will stay on my knees with my head bowed. Then you can speak as long as you continue to just mouth what you're told to mouth. That's how it works in the critical theory world. And so those are the only people who can speak. Just watch what happens when someone who plainly is going to say, you know what, this is self-destructive. It's going to ruin everything. It doesn't make any sense. Let alone says, hey, how about we actually debate this? Yeah, that's never going to happen. As soon as they arrange a meeting anywhere, watch the very same outrage machine kick into gear. Now, we've almost become accustomed to this. That's not a good thing. But we've almost become accustomed to this in the society. Now we're seeing it in the church. And now we're seeing, hey, if you dare talk about intersectionality, if you dare talk about the race relations and say that the paradigm that is being forced upon us, which is not a biblical paradigm by any stretch of the imagination and could not survive biblical debate, but you'll never hear a biblical debate on that subject. If you dare raise these issues and say, this is an error, we will shout you down. You need to repent. You need to be shamed. How dare you? I've already read you the tweets. I've already read you where my daring to not jump on the burn the founders to the ground bandwagon. Sinful. You're blind. You need to join in. What in the world has happened? The same people who only 2 years ago would have said, hey, chill, let's see what the video says, let's analyze it, are now, oh no, got it, act now, got it. Or you're no longer my friend, I'm not going to be a supporter of you. So those are your two sources. And I don't even know how to demonstrate that the second source is indicative of fourth stage cultural cancer. I don't, it's so obvious, it's so plain. When you cannot have liberty of thought, you cannot have meaningful exchange, you cannot have debate, when one side is just simply told to shut up. You cannot speak. And I think that's what people have objected to. Well, why was that one thing included in the trailer where you just need to be quiet and listen? Because that's exactly what we're being told. There cannot be any interaction. There cannot be give and take. We are to allow the imposition of racialist categories rather than Christian categories. And I'm sorry, not a one of you people, and you know it, not a one of you people can back any of this up in a debate. You know it. You know that you have absolutely picked your verses, but anybody with any background could demonstrate that you're doing it out of context, against the apostolic witness, against the practice of the apostles in the early church, that what you are suggesting and demanding that we embrace would have led to the absolute destruction of the apostolic church in the Roman Empire. You know it. That's why you will never debate. You'll never do it. And so the only way, since you can't debate it and win the debate, is to just shut the other side up based on racial categories, based on sexual categories, gender categories, whatever. This same train that has mowed over the core of Western society, law, ethics, morality, that was based upon the shared imago Dei of man, well, that's now busted through the front door of the Reformed / evangelical church. And that's the situation that we face. And so what are you hearing? Calls for boycotting founders, and don't let them come to the convention next year, and the whole nine yards. It's just a full-on frontal attack and crusade, impugning motives, doing everything that they then say Founders is doing. So Founders can say, we need to talk about these subjects. That means you're attacking these people, so you're a terrible, horrible person. This is the very essence of what we see on our university campuses, what we see in politics, what we see amongst cultural elites. It's everywhere. And now it's in the church as well, and that's the source of the outrage. And that's the only way to describe it, the outrage that has been expressed at the very, at the willingness of someone to stand up and say, you know what, this is not right. Let's talk about this and shine a light on it. And no, we will shut you down. We will shut you down. And so immediately there were media sources, ostensible journalists who were on top of this, and just accepting every accusation and every, I don't know, we're just not to be associated with this, and that we're just not going to allow this to be discussed. And it was so obviously coordinated and so obviously a part of a general intentional movement that I don't know how anybody who didn't just sit back for a second and go, oh, that's pretty weird how fast that's happening. And look at that. It's almost like they had that written up already. Is that strange? Not allowed to recognize those things anymore, I guess. I don't know. So let's talk about the non-issue. And I'm sorry, I think it's a non-issue. When you have something like this, the best way to derail something like this is to jump on something, invest it with massive emotional weight, and hope it blows the project up. And that's what happened with the Rachel Denhollander thing. When I first started hearing this, I was just like, I'm sorry, they're saying what? What's going on? What? And here's the narrative that friends of mine, and maybe they wouldn't consider me friends anymore, but friends of mine have enunciated, is a 1 second blurred image. And look, I wouldn't have had a clue who that was. I would not have known if I had not heard beforehand. This was in the context, it was very shortly after the Dwight McKissick thing, or about women preaching in the church, Holy Spirit of God, egalitarianism, gender roles, whole nine yards. It's all blurred out. I assume this is intended as a woman speaking, leading, teaching, whatever else the situation might be. And so you've got a 1 second blurred image, and at the same time, a narration drawn from, I guess, the passage in Ephesians. And what you're supposed to believe is that this is an intentional action to identify this woman as a demon. You're actually supposed to believe that. And I'm just like, how demonic do you have to think these people are that would be their intentional act? I mean, first of all, it wouldn't work. If the name had not been put out there, 99% of the people watching this wouldn't have had the foggiest idea that that's who it was. It wouldn't have worked. If that was the intentional action, that was the dumbest thing anyone has ever done. But you have to just assume not only stupidity, but just rank evil motives. And evidently, there are a lot of people like, hey, I don't mind. And that's just it. These are the Reformed Southern Baptists, and it's Reformed people that have jumped all over it. A 1 second blurred out image. Nobody seemed to go, and here's my theory, okay? I could be wrong. I haven't asked, but here's my theory. Immediately before this, you have the Beth Moore clip. My understanding is that's from the same panel. So you already had converted, and I don't do video editing, but I've done a little bit of it, and I've had to bring video in from different sources, and then you have to match up the frame rates and resolution and all the rest of that stuff and try to make it work. And anymore, most of the programs do that sort of automatically, but in the olden days, sometimes that was a real pain. It looked really goofy. Anyway, you've already converted that video. It's already there. And so you're talking about egalitarianism and gender roles. And so here's a woman speaking. I'll blur it out and I'll use it as the B-roll background to fill in. You know, you've got a certain length of an audio quote and you got to fill the time. And so it's 14.2 seconds long, something like that. What am I going to put in the background? That makes perfect sense to me. That seems logical to me when you're trying to put something together. And it would not require massive conspiratorial assumptions. I'm just stunned at the willingness of folks that I know to go, you know what? I think there was a massive conspiracy there. And I think they were sitting there going, we're going to take a shot at her. I don't even have any reason to think that they have any problem with her. She hasn't taken any positions, to my knowledge. Maybe I just don't know, but I don't think she's an egalitarian. So why? It just doesn't make any sense. So to assume that somebody would do something that is completely contradictory to the whole purposes of what they're doing, totally unintentional. Why make that assumption? But man, I'll tell you, if you don't agree with that conspiracy, you're out the door. I don't care if you've been doing what you've been doing for 35 years. You're out of there. You're a bad man. That's where we are today. But it worked perfectly. It worked perfectly. You take 1 second that has nothing to do with the subject of the film, as far as I can tell. And that's why I don't understand the Matt Chandler part. So there was fodder provided inadvertently, I think. Connection not necessarily made, but I'm just assuming what the connection was. But you take that one second, and hence we don't have to. What have we been talking about? How much of the conversation since Tuesday has been, I see a lot of identity politics starting to show up in our churches, and issues like that, and no, that's not been the discussion. All of that energy that would have, in a positive way, been able to be used in that sense, dissipated. Brilliantly done by the other side. And I think a lot of folks brilliantly played in the process by it, just brilliantly played. But for some folks, that's the most important thing about the whole thing. Clearly, I just read you someone saying they don't care what the final thing will be. They've been enraged enough and emotionally roiled enough by what has been said about a trailer to not even give consideration to the argumentation of the entire presentation. That's where we live today. That is not a mature way of thinking. That is an infantile way of thinking. That is, I'm so mad at that guy for beating my team. I don't care what team he ever plays for. I'll never vote for them. Thinking. And yet that's now accepted in our society. The factuality, importance, biblical soundness of anything that might be said in the final product, irrelevant, because I've been emoted. I've been emotionally offended. Even if I had to buy into a conspiracy theory to be emotionally offended. That's why sometimes I'll just be honest with you. I just wonder if it's too late. If it's just too late. If there has been such a long period of degradation, of honoring logic and rationality and the process of argument and all the rest of the time, some days I just go, may just be too late. And I don't know. There you go from there. In the midst of all this, I have a feeling this was what's called a subtweet. But Mika Edmondson put out a tweet on the 23rd. And maybe it was a subtweet, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But it's the conjugate, it's the this and a response that I wanted to comment on. He wrote, whatever critical race theory actually is, I find that interesting, that he would start with who knows? Now, certainly there are probably lots of different applications, but I think you can identify what CRT is, well, what CT is, and then its application. So you got critical gender theory and critical race theory. And basically, if you can identify an area of human thought, you can put a C before it and a T after it. The result will be the destruction of that. It's intellectual acid is what it is. And it's meant to be. It's meant to break apart. That's the whole point of it. It can't build anything up. It cannot create anything. It can only destroy. So critical race theory is destroying the relationship between ethnicities because it destroys the ability to identify commonalities and foundations of unity. So the result is what we're seeing today. Whatever critical race theory actually is, it's certainly not a bigger threat to the church's witness than, here's the list, widespread sexual abuse and cover-ups, domestic violence, partisan hijacking of our moral witness, greed, misogyny, and ever-encroaching xenophobic and white nationalist beliefs. Now, I wanted to analyze this because it is one of the best examples I have ever seen of how to piggyback critical theory, promotion, and apologetics on given and accepted categories of biblical sin and biblical issues. That's what's being done. And again, it's working because we have, for so many decades now, not practiced and hence taught the next generations the importance of, well, to use the old phrase, thinking God's thoughts after him. Honoring God by the logical, rational application of God, the God-given reasoning ability that we have, identifying proper categories, et cetera, et cetera. So what you start with are givens, but they're categorically distinct. You see, critical theory can absolutely destroy the foundations of the faith, because when you really take it to its critical biblical theory is what has been practiced in liberalism for centuries now. And it results in the destruction. It results in Union Theological Seminary. So some of these are more basic and foundational than others. The application of critical theory to biblical theology, systematic theology, ecclesiology is more fundamentally destructive than any of these others. So the very statement mixes categories and introduces false dichotomies to make the argument that we shouldn't be all this concerned about critical theory in the first place. We should be looking at these other things in a more important fashion. But sexual abuse and cover-ups, is there anyone who would argue that Scripture is not clear on these issues? That there is a need for a new hermeneutic to find some new way of understanding? Or if you look at the revisionist argumentation of Revoice or the quote unquote gay Christian movement, is anyone arguing that that's what you need to do to come up with prohibitions against sexual abuse within the church? Well, of course not. Those are all givens. That's obvious. Domestic violence. Again, it is fundamentally a given that the husband is to love the wife, give his life in her protection and service. She is to respect him. There is to be, the father is not to exasperate the children to anger, but to train them up. These are fundamental commands that no one's going to argue about. But it's not in any way relevant to critical theory either, because critical theory could actually cause a redefinition of those biblical parameters that would prohibit such things, as it certainly does when it comes to sexuality. So you have two, you start with two that are givens, even though inaccurately applied to this particular situation. Then you make the switch and you use what you hope has been the automatic acceptance of the first two to drag your political train in from there. Partisan hijacking of our moral witness. Now, I have a feeling what Mika Edmondson thinks that might mean, because I'm hearing that constantly in our culture. But obviously for me, when I see the wild-eyed leftist liberals doing blessings of Planned Parenthood abortuaries, that would fit in there. When I see evangelicals saying it's okay to vote for people who will silence us when we speak against abortion, silence us when we speak against homosexuality, silence us when we speak against the profaning of marriage, silence us when we speak against pedophilia, silence us when we speak against transgenderism. I would say that's a hijacking of our moral witness by the left. So that's a vague enough category, but you're hoping that the reader will just fill in with whatever their bias or prejudice might be at that particular point. Greed. Word faith movements, issues like that, the type of rich megachurch situation where it's all for the aggrandizement of a few and their private jet planes and stuff like that. Okay, but I doubt that's what is behind this. My guess would be that there is somewhat of a socialist concept behind that, economic equality idea, which again, outside of the Bible saying that you're not to use unequal scales, that you're to care for the poor, the gleaning laws and things like that. Good luck coming up with a biblical foundation for substantiating socialism. Not gonna work. But then we have one of the but then we get the three buzzwords. So do you notice the progression here? Now we get the buzzwords: misogyny, misogyny. Just as with the term racism today, the redefinition and abuse of this term has rendered its original meaning irrelevant in our society. There are some freaks who hate women, and we all recognize they're freaks. Maybe they had mommy issues or something, I don't know, but there are some freaks out there, and we identify them as such, and they're reprehensible, and we shame them. But now, today, if you dare say God created men and women with different purposes and roles in life, you misogynist, you hate women. And as soon as you say that, I'm surprised that homophobia didn't end up in here, because that's homophobia, transphobia, all of these buzzwords that are meant to be insults, but have been so redefined that on any logical reflection for more than 30 seconds, you struggle to not laugh at the application that is being made, the foolishness of the application. Misogyny. Do you really think misogyny is a greater threat to the church's witness than critical race theory? See, now we've the idea of chains like this, of shifting terminology, is that you get down to what you really want to promote at the end, hoping that the connection you've made up at the beginning will hold true. It doesn't once you analyze, like we're doing right now. And so the fundamental redefinition of revelation and the relationship of God to the world itself and our relationship to one another is far more of a threat to the Christian church than whatever it is you're calling misogyny. Because I don't see misogyny. I don't see it happening. What you're doing is you are trying to smuggle the idea of egalitarianism and the complete redefinition of gender roles into that term misogyny. And it's a grossly invalid utilization of language and should be repudiated. Ever encroaching xenophobic and white nationalist beliefs. Now, again, I don't know about the rest of you. It has, what was it, 2 years ago at most, I had never had anyone accuse me of anything regarding white nationalism. I grew up in a day when you looked forward to the Summer and Winter Olympics. Man, that was big stuff. Because remember, you only had like 3 TV channels back then. Yes, we did survive that. We went outside and played. That's great. We jumped bikes over rickety jumps that today OSHA would show up and shut it down. We had lemonade stands before they would tax you for that too. Anyway, but we would look forward to the Olympics, and you know what? I rooted for Team USA. I guess that was a white nationalist sin. Have you seen how fast this has developed? And you just stand back and go, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean white nationalist? What? This is a greater threat to the church than critical theory? And we all know what xenophobic means. Xenophobic is the term that is now being utilized by those that are pushing open borders, the destruction of national sovereignties. Folks, nations are ordained by God, and they're a good thing. It is absurd, it is insane, and it is evil. Evil, E-V-I-L, to promote the idea that a nation can exist without borders. You cannot have taxation. You cannot have taxation without borders. You cannot have a healthcare system. You cannot have military. You cannot have any of these things without borders. It is impossible, utterly impossible. You have to keep that in mind. You have to keep that in mind. So with that in mind, I wanted to analyze this, see how you chain things together as one of the most classic examples of the presentation of the promotion of critical theory by Mika Edmondson in this tweet. And then, very briefly, I've already gone a little bit over time, very briefly, someone named Social Conservative, interestingly enough, responded to that by going, boom! In critical theory, they've created another straw man to make unnecessary noise about, but that list of threats you gave, spot on. So you see, by pushing this other stuff, in this person's mind, straw man. There's nothing dangerous about critical theory, even though all the rest of the stuff is actually based upon the, not the first two, but the rest of it, application of critical theory within the Christian faith. It's just how it's working. So those of us who don't want to react in a knee-jerk fashion, who want to, I mean, my suggestion was so simple, was so easy. Just let's wait. Can we wait? Can we do that? That's the issue. That now is not allowed. That now is not allowed. So, well, with that, I don't know what the schedule next week's going to look like, but that's really more up to Rich than it is to me. We'll talk about it, and we'll obviously, this is a story that we need to keep following, but there's other things to be dealing with, and I'm going to be speaking up here in Colorado, a number of different issues. We put up some banner ads and made some announcements as to when that's going to be and what that's going to be on. We'll be talking about Mormonism down in Boulder on Wednesday, if you're down in that direction. So there's other things to be dealing with, but this I felt needed to be addressed, especially because I've seen so many people fully willing to divide over an unwillingness on our part to just automatically jump onto conspiracy theories and to throw founders under the bus based upon emotional outrage. It's an amazing day we live in. It really, really is. I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful to you. Appreciate the time you took to watch the program today. Thank you, Rich, for coming down to make it possible. And we will see you next time on The Dividing Line. God bless.